Okay, so I have with me here Rick Broniec. Rick, welcome to the Boundless Body podcast.
Oh, thanks, Brian. It's such a joy to be here with you, my old friend. We were
Oh,
just reminiscing about how many years we've been connected. Close to 20.
yeah, probably
Yeah,
about 20 years.
yeah.
Amazing. So I'll read your intro here and then we'll be catapulted into a discussion about men and
Mhm.
isms and the issues that men face. This is June is Men's Health Month.
Right.
So this is one of the reasons why I asked you to do this interview with me today. And this is a way of me honoring Men's Health Month. And I'm really glad that you showed up
You're-
for
I'm glad to be here. Always glad
it.
to talk about men and men's health
Yeah.
and helping men out.
So here we go. Rick Broniec is a writer, coach, and sought after facilitator. He has been a respected leader of men's trainings and leadership trainings since 1990. He has facilitated over 200 men's personal growth and leadership workshops on 5 continents and 11 countries for thousands of men, which gives him a unique window into the needs of the modern man. Rick is also a best-selling author of Power Tools for Men, a blueprint for healthy masculinity, and as well as the 7 Generations Story, an incentive to heal yourself, your family, and the planet. He also wrote A Passionate Life, 7 Steps for Reclaiming Your Passion, Purpose, and Joy. So, in addition, as we were just talking about, Rick has created several successful trainings on the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the Mankind Project, an international organization dedicated to transforming the lives of men. So I met Rick back in, I believe, about 2005. I did the Issues and Isms course with Rick as part of my leadership training. And Rick, you've been doing this multicultural and diversity work for over 25 years. I'm wondering if we can start there and just talk about your experience teaching that workshop with your co-facilitator, Henry Thurman, who's a Black man.
Mhm.
Lots of experiences, lots of stories, thousands of men's stories about inclusion and diversity and encountering isms. Tell us about that.
Oh, thanks, Brian. I mean, that's a large question, so I'll share what I can share this morning. After I did my initial men's training, the New Warrior Training Adventure with the Mankind Project, I ended up in this powerful in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that would have been 34 years ago, a long time. And Henry Thurman, who is my dearest friend, and as you mentioned, is African American and has a deep interest in healing multicultural diversity and equity wounds in the world, was in my group. And along with a powerful gay man, we had a bisexual man, a Jewish man. We had an unusual men's circle back in those days. It was quite diverse. And we immediately began bumping into these unconscious issues of diversity that I was completely unconscious of. And it showed up in the way in microaggressions that I was doing to these men that I loved dearly, that I had staffed with, that I had come close to, that I was doing leadership training with. We hung out together all the time when we weren't in group. And I kept doing and saying things that was hurtful. Like I stood up Henry one time and I said, Henry, I was wanted to honor him because I loved him so much. And I said, want you to know I don't see you as a Black man. I just see you as a man. Well, what the hell kind of blessing was that? That was a curse. And he got very upset and angry and left the group for a while. And I couldn't understand why. I was just trying to bless my friend. And it wasn't until years later when I did my first multicultural awareness training myself that I got this huge aha, this explosion within me about holy shit. If I don't see him as a Black man, I don't see him at all because of his experience in the world and how different his life is than mine. Even though we had all these similarities, Brian, we were both the oldest sons of large families. We both had alcoholic fathers. We both had religionaholic mothers. And we both lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We went to the same college and we were both public school teachers. Now, all those similarities, helped us bond and connect. And it didn't help one bit with my unconsciousness around how I kept giving him microaggressions racially how I kept giving microaggressions to my gay friend along LGBTQ issues and so forth. So doing this training 25 years ago just blew me apart again. It was like another initiation. And when I got back from that weekend, the first thing I did was I called Henry and I said, I did a huge mea culpa. I said, you've been talking to me for a long time about me needing to do my work, and you wouldn't tell me what my damn work was. You said, you got to figure that out, Rick. Well, I think I figured it out. And I think I know how I've hurt you. And I told him, we both started crying. He said, that's the moment I began to trust you, as not just as a brother, but as a white man. And since then, we've developed this even closer relationship that has blessed me and him, I think, and also made me more available and much more aware of how I interact with men of difference in the world and in the Mankind Project. And that led me to have a deep desire to offer similar awareness training to other men, particularly white, straight, cisgendered, middle-class men like me and you, who we don't have a clue because we haven't been raised in that oppressive environment where we're constantly getting microaggressed. And I'll tell you, it's been a great joy to do that work over the years. Hugely challenging because there's so much resistance, more now in the last few years than ever, because of an attack on DE&I work, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And nevertheless, I persist because it's important to me. And it's important to my friend Henry and other men of difference in my life who are looking to have safer connections, safer circles for them. The Mankind Project, for example, I know you went through it too, is a tremendous place of transformation. And many of our circles were quite unsafe for men of difference because of the microaggressions that were happening unconsciously. Nobody was doing it on purpose. We just say and do these things like I did with Henry and I did with my friend Leonard and others that push them out of the circles, that they don't feel safe. And when they try to explain it to guys like me, we don't understand it. We take it personally like it's an attack. Oh, I'm not racist or I'm not heterosexist. What's wrong with you? And turn it around on that. And that happens every place. In the workplace, I do a training called Power, Privilege, and Difference in the Workplace with colleagues of mine in a company we started called Wisdom Windfall. We find it just constantly present in the workplace and want to give people a chance to talk about it, the difference in particular. And it's safe. They just open up with all these examples of microaggressions and macroaggressions and, places where they've been pushed away or overlooked or spoken over. And, so I have a deep passion as part of my mission to continue to do this work, Brian. And I appreciate you giving a chance to for us to unpack a little bit of that and talk about it. We talk about it in my book, Power Tools for Men. And then I do these trainings, Power, Privilege, and Difference in the Workplace through whistlerwindfall.com. And one for the Mankind Project called Unpacking Power, Privilege, and Difference. And that's an 8-week online, 3-hour per session, taking a deep look at DE&I work at 5 specific isms: racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, and cisgenderism. And that has been amazingly transformative for many, many people. I'm really proud to have been a co-creator of that with Henry and several other very powerful co-creators. We had a trans man on that group. We had a couple of gay men, several people of color. And that training is being offered 5-6 times a year by the Mankind Project. So I'm really proud of that, happy for that. And, there's work to be done. As you know, in your realm, tremendous work to be done. That's what got me started. And I just want to return it back to you.
Yeah, so I'm from the Midwest as well. I'm from Minnesota, and we're kind of nationally known for our niceness. Exactly. Minnesota nice.
Yeah.
And, in Minnesota, we meet with this strange principle in isms
Mhm.
that I've been calling. If my mom ever listens to this, God bless you, Mom, I love you. But I like to say that she's one of the nicest racists around,
Mhm.
and that this is this paradox because an ism is almost equated immediately with a type of meanness, but
Right.
a person can throw around aggressions and still feel nice and still appear nice on the outside, but some really gnarly stuff is happening. So yeah, I really appreciate in the crucible of your learning that you just described to me and to the audience, and your journey with Henry, and basically you were elders to me in my own process of awakening to be a real nice person. It takes more work than just
Yes.
assuming that I'm a nice person, right? So I remember doing this first issues and isms workshop with you and Henry, where I woke up to unearned privilege,
Yeah.
and that was a huge awakening for me, where I was like, it just dawned on me sometime in the workshop. I'm like, oh fuck, I'm not as nice as I thought,
Exactly. In fact, my
and
is a
just waking up to that was a huge change in my life. So I just really want to appreciate you for that.
thanks for sharing that, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And George Floyd blew a hole in that, not just in Minnesota, but across the country and the world, and in a very visceral way. We saw the niceness of what happened to him, and that became a metaphor for what happens to people of color around the United States and the world. You got to be woke up once in a while with something like that. And white people jumped on the bandwagon for about a year and then began to drift off and jump off the bandwagon. Like, I volunteered for an organization that's national, but there's centers in most every city called Surge, which is showing up for racial justice. It's the white ally arm of Black Lives Matter. After George Floyd, our Surge chapter surged, so to speak, to over 500 members. And here it is 4 years later, and it's drifted down to about 20 people that keep showing up at meetings. And the rest of them have absolutely no interest in participating, coming to meetings, to even being online and listening to speakers. That's what happens to us. We go unconscious again. And I'm not judging anybody because I do it still. But we go unconscious again, and we start thinking, well, what does that have to do with my life? And the old message is about, well, the people of color just worked harder and stopped getting themselves in trouble in the first place. We wouldn't have these issues with the cops or with whatever. And it's easy to go unconscious. It's so easy.
Mhm.
It's so much more convenient because then I don't have to look at the uncomfortableness of that shit that lives in me. And you mentioned in you too. And I know it lives in many, 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 many of us white people. In fact, all of us white people. If you're not actively working on it, then it's playing subconsciously, unconsciously, and out in that world.
So maybe we can just zoom out and, look at the course of 25 years of, doing this intense warrior work, supporting guys and waking up to some really difficult
Mhm.
unconscious stuff. In 25 years of doing this work with Henry, if we zoom out to the kind of meta level, what have you seen change?
Well, I can speak to this in the 1990s when I first started doing deep men's work and other work. Um, Within the men's organizations, there was zero awareness of the need to do work around difference. It was like, we're all brothers, we're all the same. And that was a comfortable and frankly healing place to be for many of us. And then we have this hunger to want to diversify our organization, to reach out to men of difference, to have more men of color, for example, more GBTQ men, more men from different classes, more transgender men in our organization. And we started reaching out, and men started hearing the call and coming, and then they get into our communities and into our I groups. And because we haven't done the work we needed to do, we we begin to push them away with the microaggressions and with the unconsciousness and with the things we said and the things we did. So it was come here, go away, come here, go away, those mixed messages. And those men are the ones that begin to speak quite loudly, not only in MKP, but in a lot of places, about the need to get more awareness. And of course, this goes back to the 60s, to the whole race issues, oppression issues that have been plaguing this country and the world for, time immemorial. And that's why it's so difficult. It's been there so long. It's so deeply embedded, and what happens with men is they tend to see racism, sexism, and so forth as individual shortcomings, not systemic, cultural-wide, deeply embedded issues that impact every aspect of our lives. So when racism comes up, we want to pull back and say, I'm not racist. I don't use the N-word. I talk to my neighbor who's a person of color, or I talk to my colleagues, not noticing how we play along with this unconscious, deeply embedded systemic racism. And the same thing goes for men and women around sexism and around LGBTQ folks around heterosexism. Exactly the same dynamic. And that's one of the reasons why I like the model multicultural awareness that we use in our trainings, because it shows the commonality of behaviors that happen across all the isms. Doesn't matter what the oppression is, the tendency is to behave much the same way. And also to heal it much the same way. So the tools that we teach are also universal. And they do cause systemic change, starting with me, or you in your case, when you did an I&I and went, oh shit, and then spreading out through you being an educator and a podcaster and so forth, me being a writer and a coach and a trainer of thousands of them. It radiates outwards slowly but surely. I mean, I have a mission to change the culture, not just change me or you or any particular group of men, but to change that systemic system that still negatively impacts many people the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as you know, I'm a somatic psychologist, body mind specialist. So I'm always interested somewhere in the background or in the foreground. What are the consequences of big dynamics like this on individual bodies?
Oh,
There's this term called the racialized body. I'm sure you've heard that term,
yeah.
where there's direct somatic consequences on the body. And in these men's groups that you've participated in and led for many years now, one of the primary elements of the work of transformation is getting the clogged plumbing unclogged. You know what I mean? It's like, I like to think that somatic work is just kind of like plumbing. We just need to find where the clog is and unclog it. So maybe you could talk a little bit about process work, and maybe some of the history of it, and then, like what you've seen work in terms of the racialized body and what you've seen work with white men and so on. I know that's another big question, but that's how we roll.
Yeah, that's how we roll. That's great. I love it. Well, let me say this. One tool does not fit all. So in the Mankind Project, we developed some pretty powerful transformative tools that work on the personal level. So my personal story that holds me back, the story I make up about myself, the shadows, if you're into that terminology, that block me, the archetypes that I have strengthened and weakened within myself. All of that is part of what men's organizations like the Mankind Project espouse. And they work great at the personal level. It changed my life. I know it changed your life. We've worked together for a long time, and it's changed Henry's life and many men. But it doesn't have anything to say about the cultural or systemic level of the isms. And trying to use the same tools to deal with racism, for example, and how it lands on a Black man or a brown man, or sexism, how it lands on a woman, does not work. Now, we tried like hell to make it work. and were wondering why it didn't, needed different tools. Hence the multicultural awareness trainings that we do right now. They offer very different tools. They're great tools. They work just as much to transform, but they transform in a different way. And I think it's important for everybody to realize that there's a different set of tools that work at the cultural or systemic level. Okay, so it isn't about an individual's racism, it's about what happens at the cultural level. So, for example, trying to assign victimhood to a Black person who's experienced racial oppression from the moment he was born, probably long before he was born. Do that with a racialized, traumatized mother and father and society and so forth. I mean, Menachem did such a great job of sharing about that. It doesn't work. You have to look at a whole different set of tools and awarenesses to get at that. Just as my work mostly is about me owning my privileges, becoming aware of my privileges, noticing in society where my privileges show up. And privilege, by the way, doesn't mean I had it easy. I'm not saying any white middle class Jewish guy automatically has it easy. It simply means that I didn't have some roadblocks in the way that other people do, that they have to overcome. That's what privilege means. Privilege also gives me the opportunity to use my privilege to help solve the problem, rather than pulling all my privilege into myself and just living in it and enjoying it. I can use my privilege. So my job is to work on my privilege for the most part. I mean, there's parts of me that are oppressed as well. And in those parts, I have to do my internalized oppression work, IO, which is very much about that racialized trauma that gets stored in our bodies, stored in our tissues, and messes everything up. Our health, our mental well-being, family systems, and it goes on and on and on. I don't need to tell you that. That's your specialty. We all have work to do here. It isn't that white people have to do anti-race work and Black people have nothing to do, or brown people have nothing to do. Of course they get the extreme pleasure of working on their internalized oppression, working on this stuff that it gets stuck in our bodies. And some believe, it goes beyond one lifetime, that it's been collecting for generations. And that's not easy work. And it's generally not helpful for you to facilitate that with a person of color or a woman or an LGBT person. They need to go into their own circles with their own facilitators who know exactly what they're experiencing to unpack that, feel safe about talking about it, know they're not the only person who's experiencing it, and to heal it. So, for example, in the Mankind Project, the Black men involved, they realized we need to have our own circles. So they started organizations outside of MKP, but related, and circles within MKP where they could sit safely with other men like them and say the things that they need to say about the white world, and not get white men saying, wait a minute, that's not me. Don't talk about me like that, that kind of stuff. And it's been, in my opinion, very beneficial to those men, of course, and also to the organization. So, I mean, there's a lot of subtlety in this, Brian. I know.
Yeah.
I don't know how deeply you want to go into it, but helping create structures for those men to be able to do their work in a safe way that has nothing to do with me. I can't facilitate that because I automatically represent that oppressive force that's been present in their lives forever. I can be an ally. I can show up as an ally for Henry and many, many other men of color, I'm pleased to say, and LGBTQ men. Many men look to me and men like me as allies, and I wouldn't even try anymore to try to facilitate that. It's their work, and they need to do it in their own circles, and they're doing it, and it's beautiful to see. Like, for example, in RPP, there's this circle of Black and brown men called the Brotherhood, and they meet regularly. And they have their own new warrior training adventures, the Brotherhood trainings, which are only men of color coming through as participants and only men of color on staff. I 100% support that. It's just freaking beautiful to see. And they can address issues on that training that don't get addressed are mixed trainings. It's not that mixed trainings can't initiate men of color. It can. But many men of color need to do the kind of work that happens best in those circles where there's only, or at least mostly men. I hope I'm making sense here.
Totally.
Okay.
So you've been exposed to a tremendous amount of diversity, 11 different countries. You've done these trainings. You know, I my teeth started getting cut at I&I around this stuff. And then I moved to New Zealand and worked with the First Nations people there.
Yes.
I worked at a cancer clinic for Maori
Wow.
folks. And then in the MKP community, I was trained as a leader by Maori men, and also, did a lot of trainings in Australia and worked with First Nations people there. So I feel really blessed to have been exposed to a fair bit of diversity myself. But that's
Yes.
where, my teeth got cut even more, is just doing the work with the guys,
Mm-hmm.
and putting my foot in the shit and not knowing that, and that you just learn through mistakes. And it takes a lot of courage to fail together and to stand in the fire together. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of generosity. But that's what really struck me as being so unique and wonderful, is guys, creating an environment for guys to bring conflict to, stand in the fire, and be forged as a better person, a better man in that fire of conflict. Because I like to say that our society is simultaneously conflict obsessed and repressed,
And I'm aware.
which makes
Totally.
for a really weird situation, and it creates a lot of fragmentation. So I just was really healed by these intensities. Now, they were intense, and you've been through it a lot, right? It is a crucible. It is a crucible. And I'm thinking to myself, that the way that these isms affects bodies, that it's very individual, but there does seem to be some cultural patterns. Like the way that a man from India, for example, internalizes oppression or negotiates their emotions, has a kind of distinctive pattern as compared to an American white man. And obviously it's not a algorithm or something like that, but there does seem to be some patterns. Yeah.
I agree 100%. And that's all the more reason why an Indian man, for example, needs to be with other Indian men in a circle to say, this is what's going on for me, and have them say, yeah, me too. And it's cultural, and it's deeply embedded, and we don't have to respond that way if you don't want to. We can change the way we respond to the societal messages, for example. I had a privilege 7 times to go to South Africa and lead multicultural trainings, and more importantly, even new warrior training adventures in that culture. At the time, the trainings were about 50% white men, 50% black men. And this was within less than a decade after the end of apartheid. So you're talking about that living in the bodies, in the memories of these men. And I'm telling you, some of the stuff that came up in the trainings was just absolutely mind-boggling. And I learned a lot, like you did with the Maori men. I learned when to keep my big mouth shut, and also when to support as an ally. I mean, when you have men who have black men who have been imprisoned and tortured by white men, and white men who were prisoners and torturers showing up on the same healing training, both needing healing, it is unbelievable what can happen. I mean, it's just, it lives in my body. It's like, whoa, I went back again and again because it was so moving, so deep. So I was so grateful to witness and to support exactly what you talked about. And it's fucking uncomfortable because a lot of times I didn't know what to say. I had no idea. I just had to keep my mouth shut or ask what is helpful here. What can I do? And a lot of times it's like, go stand over there, Rick. Stay out of it. Cool. Glad I asked.
Curb your mansplaining tendencies.
No shit. No.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the paradox occurs to me that it's like a paradox of leadership. Like, in order to learn how to lead sensitively and with cultural humility, I needed to learn how to follow. So the well-attuned leader needs to learn how to follow. You can't be a good leader unless you know how to follow.
Yeah, and we ask questions instead of lecturing, which white men tend
Yeah.
to do. Tend to lecture, and we know it all, and we're going to tell you how this is fixed. Ask questions and then really listen, and be careful what
Yeah.
you ask for, because sometimes the listening means we don't fucking need you right now. Stay out of it. Uh, anyhow, you got brother. That's very, very important.
One of the magical potencies that circulates through MKP, and there's this offspring community. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're called the Sacred Sons,
Mm-hmm.
which seems to be kind of like version 2.0 or something of MKP, where there's a different vibe. There's more of a millennial imprint on it as opposed to boomer imprint. Is the healing power of ritual. Now, ritual, I think, is underutilized. It has all sorts of connotations that can turn a lot of men off because it carries this strange connotation, I think, for some people. But if you frame ritual as a kind of general thing that mammals do, basically. I mean, I went to the San Francisco Zoo not too long ago, and I was watching a wolverine pace in a rhythmic manner, and it was repetitive, and it was I would say that it was a kind of ritual of territory making, where it just constantly looped
Mm-hmm.
in a circle, as if to say, hey, I'm ritually creating my space.
Interesting.
So I think that ritual is like a mammal thing. I think it's deep in the mammals. The healing power of ritual really showed up for me when I was working in New Zealand,
Yeah.
and we were doing things like the haka.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, one of the beauties of ritual technologies is it helps to take the primordial potencies, the emotions such as aggression, and put it into an artistic form that's creative.
Right. It's beautiful. I mean, that's so great. And I think the resistance to it, Brian, is that so many of us have been wounded by unhealthy rituals earlier in our lives, be it from well-meaning churches, organizations, whatever. We push away from it or label it as a cult or cult-like. And therefore we cheat ourselves of the kind of healing exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, if you put on a lens looking for ritual, you'll kind of see it everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
In the hospital system, where there's the donning of the white coat and the stethoscope. There's the ritual of therapy, where you have the process of making the sacrifice, paying the money, and then this kind of place apart from mundane, ordinary existence, where you have different conversations. You have a different meaning making process, a different qualitative aspect of connection, a different type of conversation.
True.
And so it's kind of everywhere. It's in the rituals of an obsessive compulsive type, checking to see if the stove is off or whatnot. And so to me, it's not a question of, are we going to ritualize? It's how satisfying and how creative can it be, and how much can it provide an environment for connection?
Absolutely. And what we've often lost as more modern men is the sort of primeval, natural, sacred ritual of initiation, for example, or other kinds of ritual that we don't allow ourselves to have anymore. And you being immersed in the Maori community and being reconnected to that, and me having a chance to do that in other cultures around the world is so eye-opening and so deeply satisfying. I mean, for my own healing, to get in touch with the earth again and do a sacred sweat lodge, for example, or other rituals, whatever it is that bring me back to myself and bring me back to the important, but maybe primitive part of myself that gets ignored and wasn't nurtured in this crazy world that we live in now.
There was a study done by the World Health Organization, maybe like a decade or something like that. And they took all of this data about happiness on planet Earth. And they're kind of asking the question, why are so many people so unhappy? And they boiled down the data into a few words.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the words was rootless.
Wow.
It gives me the tingles all over my body to just say it that way, because one of the things that I woke up to when I was exposed to these ritual technologies. Now, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and of course, it's heavily ritualized, you know. So, I had a blueprint for that, but then I kind of had this phase of really turning my back on that and turning to more like yoga stuff,
Right.
and which is a different ritual form of how the body breathes and puts itself in motion. When I was living in New Zealand and I was doing this Haka stuff, and I was like, oh gosh, aggression, wow, this can be creative potency. I can channel this in a way that can be done creatively. I started to think, coupled with the multicultural inquiry,
Right.
well, where are my cultural roots
Right.
when it comes to ritual technologies? Because when Christianity came through Ireland, it completely uprooted all of these body-based pagan practices, earth-based, because a lot of the megalithic sites in Ireland are basically astroarchaeology sites, right? We lost that technology. I started to think of myself as a cultural orphan, and I really started to research into, my own Anglo-Celtic roots, and through my ancestry and whatnot. And the weird thing is that, yeah, there's like Wicca communities and kind of occult communities, but there's not really a sense where it converges on a collective root. And so I was thinking to myself, gosh, this cultural orphan thing that I felt must be one of the primary reasons for cultural appropriation.
I think you're right on there. And I think particularly white men of European heritage have lost that for exactly the reasons you're talking about. And there is a deep hunger to restore that. We don't even know why, or it's visceral. And so cultural appropriation could easily be brought into that. And there's also this place of what do I do with these energies, that can come out as violence, for example, that the old ways of initiating, the old ways of connecting to the earth and community, they nurtured that, guided that, and said that, as you said before, this is a good place to put that energy. As a man in our community, or a young man, or an older man in our community, this is where you can focus that aggression, for example, and serve the community instead of hurting the community. And right now, there's so much hurting going on in the world, in our culture. Just to share a couple of statistics, I'm going to read a little bit because I've written this, and the statistics are stunning, Brian. I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but of course, not all men promulgate this, but listen to this: 93% of people in prisons in the US are male. Men commit over 97% of mass shootings in the United States, perpetrate 90% of homicides, are victims of homicide 78% of the time, commit suicide 7 times more often than women. 70% of substance abuse treatment admissions are male. In 2021, there was 818 mass shootings in the United States, and there were several thousand people killed and many thousands injured in those mass shootings, and all but 2 were perpetrated by men. All but 2. In the next year, which is the last year we have statistics, there were 753 mass shootings. That's more than 2 per day in the US alone. And just a small handful perpetrated by someone who wasn't a male. So what is going on with men? And I could go on and on with statistics, on and on and on. And I'm sure you could too. So that violence that used to be focused in service to the community, right, whatever indigenous community it was, is now being focused in other ways, or isn't focused at all, and just comes out in hurtful ways and destructive ways. And those statistics, I mean, where do you hear men talking about, or people talking about, we need to start supporting men? You don't hear it very often. Like this violence, and look at the wars in the world that goes on and on and on and on. Where is it coming from? It's coming from us men, unfortunately. And what are we doing about it? Not enough. Obviously, not enough. How do we help men use that aggressive energy, which is natural to us? You know, unfortunately, whatever, you know, evolutionary path brought us here. We have our testosterone. We have that energy in us. How can we help men focus that in more useful ways rather than acting out and hurting ourselves or others, and creating more damage in the world?
Yes, we have these sporting rituals that are kind of somewhat decent at containing and channeling aggression creatively, but there's something lacking there. There's a type of embodiment that goes with being a sportsman, you know? There's a type of embodiment that goes with it, but it's not an embodiment of emotional intelligence. It's not an embodiment that connects the body with the earth, with the land, with other bodies in kind of empathic resonance and relationship. So maybe we could talk about initiation, because there's also an initiatory structure in corporations, in gangs.
Right.
There's an initiation structure in the medical community. There's an initiation structure in the psychologist community.
Right.
And sometimes embodiment is a concern. Sometimes men do have elements of coming into their body and feeling their strength, but there's something of the kind of what in MKP is called the wild man that just, I don't know. We don't have many ritual technologies to create a space for this wildness, this adventure, this great intensity inside that is much bigger than just these structures that don't have a sacred canopy and don't connect the man with the cosmos and with the earth and so on. So that's just my prompt. I'm sending the prompt over to you. Where do you want to take that?
Great comment. Again, it's a huge question. I would say that many of the rituals that you've expressed and initiations are really false initiations. They have a particular purpose. They get you intellectually, usually, to a particular point where you're safe enough and experienced enough to be a therapist or an MD or whatever. But it never deals with the deeper stuff from the neck down that we're talking about, this embedded trauma that we experience, for example. And what do I do with all this fabulous, powerful energy that's within me as a man? How do I direct that? Nobody's sharing that. And so a true initiation requires, I think, a whole community to hold that young man and give him some guideposts, some guidelines. Like, this is what we do in this community with that energy. We don't act out on our men, women, people of difference, whatever. We don't. Here's what we do with it instead. And when that starts early enough and is sacred enough and deep enough, it changes the way that we see the world. And it's changed the way I've seen the world dramatically. Getting involved with indigenous communities, for example, learning the kinds of things you're talking about, being initiated, and I've been initiated a number of times, not just once, opened my eyes to, oh, this is how I can serve the world in a different way. This is how I can be in the world in a different way. This is how I can heal this trauma that I'm carrying around that half the time I don't even realize, but is completely messing up my relationships and everything I do in the world and my own body, not taking care of myself, that kind of thing. So re-establishing that true initiation is really important. And there's a lot of people talking about it. And it's a small, very small percentage of men that have availed themselves of that. I'm glad to see the millennials are reaching out and saying, no, we want this kind of training. This works for us, right?
Yeah.
The men's organization you mentioned earlier. Mankind Project has done a job, but we've only initiated about 90,000 men in the world. You know,
Yeah.
there's 4 billion of us in the world desperately needing something. Most of us don't get that. And as a result, our aggressive energy, our sense of mission is unfulfilled. We don't know how to be in our societies, in our families, in our cultures in ways that are generative and supportive. And, you know, society tends to really judge harshly those that act out. Well, that's all of us. We're judging each other and throwing each other in prison, for example, or other kinds of prisons, you know, being cut out of society, then what does that say to that? It doesn't say you're welcome and come with us. We're going to help you. We're going to support you. It says you better pretend to behave this way or else.
Yeah.
Else you're going to be sent away.
Rick, I had no idea how angry I was. You know, I grew up in Minnesota niceness, and I had no idea that I had a pocket of rage that had gone septic in my body. I had no idea that it was there until I had elder men. That's essential to the structure. Wiser elder men that had been through the school of hard knocks and been initiated themselves and been eviscerated by the various challenges in life, right? To hold my feet to the fire. And I didn't even know it was there. I was in a circle of guys. There was an elder that saw me, and something in the seeing, he didn't even say anything. He didn't even say anything. Something in the witnessing, something in the presence just immediately brought me into this repressed region of myself that I didn't even know was there. And all of a sudden I found myself raging. And there's no place for rage where I grew up. There's no place for that. Maybe you can get a bit pissed off on the football field. But what the ancient Celtic people called the warp spasm, which I just think is an amazing thing. It's like, oh, Tierney's gone into the warp spasm, you know, like, oh, that's some creative juice, you know. There was that sense when I punctured this, or collectively we punctured this pocket of rage, I was in this warp spasm, and I was like in an altered state. I just let it rip. And after that was over, I stopped. It was a long wave, right? It went on for a while. And then when it was over, when the wave ebbed, I looked around and the guys were just looking at me with love.
Right.
And I burst out crying.
Yeah, exactly.
I burst out crying, and I think it was a crying of gratitude that, hey, nobody's going to come in to thwart me. They're not going to take me off to they're not going to judge on me. There's a place for my wildness, and what a relief.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful, Brian. I mean, I've had almost exactly the same experience, and just the presence of that elder makes it safe, right? Just the presence of seeing that older man who's been there, done that, makes it safe. And I was in a circle on the boundary waters of Minnesota and Canada 30 years ago, and had exactly the same experience in a circle of men where I felt safe, just let it all go. And I was going to ask you, what was it like when you were done? And you already said it was like, and you started crying in gratitude, right? I can feel it right now. It's coming up, this gratitude of, wow, there's a place where I can be that way. Because my assumption was going to be, if I acted out like that, everybody's going to walk away, right?
Yeah.
Judge me or whatever. And instead, they were looking at me lovingly, like the men did in your circle. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, just weeping in gratitude. And then
Yeah.
the guys picked me up and lifted me to the sky. You know, my arms were like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt like I was flying and that I was in touch
Mhm.
with something much bigger than myself, you know,
Right.
the mystery. And I was like, wow. And it was only until, you know, much later that I did all my research and I started putting the pieces together
Right.
from an intellectual perspective that I was like, wait, hang on. I am culturally rootless. Like when was a time in my Germanic and Celtic heritage where men did stuff like this? And in my research, I'm like, okay, well, the Druids had an initiatory structure.
Right.
You know, you had to memorize 200 epic poems
Wow.
to become initiated into Druidry. And then, of course, Christianity came and immediately dismantled and uprooted this ancient initiatory system that was integrated with the cosmos via the
Or co-opt
megalithic stone structures and
or co-opted it.
co-opted, yeah, absorbed it into, yeah, and that's, you know, in a type of appropriation.
Let me share a quick story that illustrates exactly what you're talking about. When I did my first multicultural weekend, training weekend, and several subsequent, one of the things we did is we split by racial groups. So one of the Black facilitators took all the Black and brown people into one room, and the white facilitator kept all us white European heritage folks in another room. And the minute the door shut on that room with the Black and brown people, it erupted into enormous energy, joy, laughter, connection. It was palpable, and we all sat as white people in a circle looking at each other in dead silence. And the facilitator let it sit in this uncomfortableness as we listened to what was going on in the other room, trying to figure out what the fuck is going on there. Why are we feeling so uncomfortable? And then he said, "So what's great about being white?" Again, dead silence, dead freaking silence, because none of us have been asked that question before. We never explored it before. We were always used to making apologies for being white instead of what's great about being white. And then one of my assignments that came out of that weekend was to really work hard about and reclaim the beauty of all my heritages. You know, I'm part Polish, German, French, Irish, like you, Scotch, and I'm 1/4 Cherokee Indian. What do I do with that mix? How do I reclaim the beauty and the power of each of those parts of my genetic heritage? And it's taken a long time to do, but it was hugely powerful work. So the next time I was in a circle like that, I was able to raise my hand right away and feel joy of being in a circle of white folks that could have that conversation. Not shame, not silence, not don't look at me. While the other room was exploding in joy and feeling connection and safety and common experience that we white people don't explore. We just don't. So that's some evidence.
Yeah, and it's not like at that point, unless those guys had done the issues and isms training, that they raised their hand immediately and said, the unearned privileges,
Right.
yeah, you know, or hey, we're the bearers of capitalism or something like that. But something deeper and more spiritual that connects us with life,
Exactly.
with the lineage of life that traces all the way back to actually our common root in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the interesting piece about all of this. Our genetic pool traces back to, you know, a little tribe of great apes in the savannas of southeastern Africa. Apparently, it's the so-called African Bushmen that carry the largest amount of that genetic ancestry. This earth-based spirituality got scapegoated by the Christian church, but not just the Christian church, by the rise of reason and the rise of the scientific tradition, the rise of reason, the rise of cognition.
Mm-hmm.
and there became a huge split between thinking and feeling. And I'm using this more and more in couples therapy, Rick, and more in my men's work, my work facilitating men's group myself. A lot of us men have this huge chasm between thinking and feeling.
Right. Totally. I mean, we're inculcated in that from before we're born. You know, the way that parents speak to boy babies, if they know they're having a boy, or girl babies in the womb, is completely different. So I was hearing messages from long before I was even in this world about what a man was. You're going to be strong. You're going to be a leader. You're going to be powerful. And women hear, oh, you're so sweet and you're so beautiful that, you know, and then of course born, and then we're put into different colored clothing and treated completely differently. It is, again, societal, systemic messages that men receive. And it is hard to root those out and to realize they're not my authentic self. They are not my authentic self. They are a template that was put on me by society, by my parents, not to hurt me. I mean, they weren't trying to hurt me. It's just what they were taught. So they thought, oh, this is the right way to raise a kid. So, yeah, it is. And when we find the ultimate, Brian, your story about, you know, being in the woods with a beautiful other, my story similar. It's like, where has that been all my life? Why didn't somebody tell me? Why didn't somebody offer that to me? Holy shit. You know, I have been separated not only from nature, from spirit or soulfulness, if you want, but I've been separated, as you pointed out, between my head and my heart in such a violent way. That I destroyed 2 marriages before I finally figured it out. Yeah, it's beautiful.
So thinking and feeling, there's often this big chasm. And I think one way of understanding it from a zoomed out perspective is earth and sky. There's this expansive element to the intellect, to the mind, to reason. And then feeling is earth. And the earth has been put upon by this split.
Right.
So the question, what is grounding for a man, to me has a lot to do with grounding in the emotional realities. Because for me, growing up where I grew up, my emotions were like an undifferentiated gray mass, or like in cancer terms, a teratoma, where the cells are like all mutated and kind of glommed together, and the cells don't know what they are or what they're doing. They sort of have a sense of a direction, but my emotions were like a gray mass, and having an elder and having more experienced, emotionally literate guys like you gave me a mirror to be like, you know, that is my nurturer.
Right.
And you know how I can feel it is because this man is nurturing me. Rick knows how to hold me when I'm raging, not when I'm raging, probably shortly thereafter, but holding from a wide space when I'm raging. And then maybe you notice, of course, you're going to notice that when I'm crying, oftentimes I want you to come in and nurture me.
Right.
And so to help to differentiate that block. And I think one of the big splits, I like to say the taboo emotion for women tends to be rage, even though it's taboo also for men. But the biggie for men is often grief and or nurturing.
Well, and also fear.
And shame, yeah. It's like all in the shadow, right?
You're a pussy, right? If you're afraid, you're a pussy. And notice how we use female anatomy to identify negative connotations for men.
And so
we have clearly split society between male expressions of feeling and female, and wonder why we can't figure out relationships, right?
Yeah, it's a mess. And one of the things I've been talking about more and more also with guys is along the lines of internalized homophobia. I think it's really, really important because there's like since Freud and, you know, beyond and before, there's this understanding that eros and aggression, love and aggression can be a tug of war inside of the person. So, you know, there's this moment And in MKP, the symbolic image for this moment is losing our sacred golden ball.
Right.
Where we're participating with other boys. Let's keep it to other boys for now. And there's a sweetness and a tenderness that after a certain age, once we get put into be a man box, nurturance among men is primarily held and projected and judged onto either women or homosexual men.
Right.
So the capacity to nurture another man gets put into shadow. And I'm finding that there's this almost this desperate, confusing urge to want to be nurtured by another man that's so locked away in some other guys because it's in their childhood. And there's just so many layers and strata of judgment and internalized homophobia, and to allow that nurturance to circulate between men is really a gauntlet to move through.
Oh, it's horrible. And many of us can remember the moment when that tender, loving feeling towards other little boys. I mean, when we were little boys, where we'd hug and kiss each other and play together and, create shit together, that when it became unacceptable, all of a sudden someone pointed out to us, no. Boys don't hug other boys. Boys don't kiss other boys. Boys don't behave that way. Boys do this. I've talked to hundreds of men. I bet you have too, where you can remember the moment when that happened. When you went, oh, I'm not okay. That's not okay. And we get back into shadow, and it causes so much pain and destruction.
So much pain. I mean, I remember, if Timothy Wackman ever is out there listening to this, he was my boy. We used to take baths together. We used to cuddle. We used to nurture. And in these sexual shadow circles in MKP, you've heard tons of these stories. Men that are in this nurturing, cozy kind of animal-like space with other boys, and then I carry so many wounds about it. It's tragic. And then that just gets put into the shadow and judged. Like, for example, when I grew up and I was reaching puberty, I'm one of the many boys out there that go through puberty that get a condition called gynecomastia. Gynecomastia is essentially inflated breast tissue. So it was really, really I was deeply, deeply ashamed of my body morphology. And so I was split off from my body because I hated my body. And the reason why I hated my body from a cultural perspective is exactly this reason. My body was showing the shape, like a womanly, nurturing shape, and I got called bitch tits for it.
Right.
It took me 15 years to figure out how to move through that wounding. And honestly, just like any community, MKP has its shadows and its limitations, right? I mean, every community, I think, has its shadows and limitations. And I think this piece around male eros and nurturance because, in terms of archetypal language, MKP focuses a lot on this warrior getting back into this kind of, how do you want to serve and protect, servant leadership, this kind of royal quality coming out of our impotence and getting our mission online. But this Timothy Wackman stuff, this kind of getting cozy in the corner in a space that is very old and primitive in the man, there's just not much of that.
Right. I got you 100%. One of the things my men's group, my men's circle periodically does, we have a cuddle night, and we get together and we do that with each other. And I don't want to cry, it's like we hold each other and just take turns nurture each other, like on a massage table, where we touch each other, we hold each other, and we give each other positive affirmations, and as a direct antidote to that shit, that it's okay to love another man, to hold another man, to hug another man, doesn't mean okay. And to re-enliven that part of our body. As you said, I got cut off totally from my body at puberty for much the same reasons. And, that's not a way to walk through life. I need this body. And as a sexual being, I needed to have access to all those feelings to be able to connect with a partner in a reasonable and whole and loving and complete way. And thank God I'm with a woman now who herself is a sex coach who demands that. When I came in to do this interview today, this was sitting on my computer keyboard to remind me. And, it's like, yeah, I need to be reminded from time to time that we need to connect in that way. And wow, what a huge gift. Now, I still lead trainings for Mankind Project, and I evolved over that time. I'm now in my 70s, and I don't lead from the warrior place anymore. I lead very much from the lover place. It doesn't change the impact of the training one bit. I still got access to my warrior when I need it. I got access to my magician. I got access to my king. And I'm not afraid to bring a lover in there in a very visceral, real way. And I noticed that men who staff weekends, and I just love it. It's like, wow, that was different. Really fun. I enjoyed it. We had so much fun this weekend. And, that's something that I choose to bring consciously and purposely to broaden the expression of men even as they staff a training for other men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This difficult matrix of unconscious aggression and all that stuff, waking up to that stuff. A lot of it is a kind, it's kind of a warrior thing in the sense of, it takes a kind of puncturing of grandiosity, unconscious grandiosity, right? It's kind of like, and puncture is a warrior image, right? It's like, whoa, Tierney, you're not seeing how you have unearned privilege. You're not seeing how you're throwing around stuff that's hurting people. You're not seeing these things. And it took a guy to come in and go poke. And warrior energy is pokey, right? It can be, the shadow side of it is combative. And if it's not held in the balance with the lover, which is all about letting down the weapons, hanging out in the garden. To me, that's one of the shadows of activism, is it can get claimed by the warrior archetype. And that's why I love writers like Adrienne Maree Brown, she wrote this book called Pleasure Activism, which is a really cool image for integration, where there's an activism there, but there's a flexibility to not just be stuck in, hey, let's deconstruct the authority and deconstruct the patriarchy and thou shall die. And it also, it starts to feel patriarchal, the anti-patriarchal vibe, right? It's like a kind of moral elitism, kind of like a hierarchical moral ladder. And the warrior is very hierarchical. So it's like, who can puncture the grandiosity the best with their weapon that doesn't look aggressive, but is aggressive. But sometimes what's needed for wider integration, is to just, let all those weapons down and see if we can find a universal solvent called love together.
Completely, Brian. All of us have wounded little boys inside of us that are desperately seeking that. Just that gentle, loving, caring presence, just listening. That's hugely healing. And I use it over and over and over again on weekends and in my private practice and my coaching, wherever. I've never met a man yet that doesn't have a little boy in there who's wanting that, right? Who's needing that. We're about 6 or 7 and something happens. All of a sudden at 6 or 7, we're in school and we get this message, it's not okay. You're not okay. And we're wounded and we need somebody to love us. Just to say you're okay the way you are. I accept you the way you are. You're right. I mean, that's so important. And I think especially for men, I think women have a way of doing that with each other that's different. They nurture each other in beautiful ways. Men, we need to learn that. We need to be taught that. We need to practice it again and again and again. But will come the enormous eternal blocks we have to opening up to that kind of tenderness.
So a lot of us men are really isolated. We're isolated by our opinions and how we fight to be right and mansplain, and then we're isolated because we've locked away our yearning for nurturance, to give and receive nurturance. We're locked away in this double bind that I articulated before, called society is simultaneously conflict obsessed and repressed, and that keeps us from, there's just, isolation is such a major problem. It really is isolated in our minds and isolated in our opinions. And, I think it's really great that cultural sovereignty is nurtured by folks that are advocating for that. As you shared this image of, okay, once there was this differentiation, what a release. What I can now have sovereignty with other guys that are like me. I mean, and that's a type of coming out of isolation. But then when does the reintegration happen? Sometimes I think, gosh, we're just, even though it seems like we're going forward, there's elements of going backwards too.
Well, there is. And I think that's where men's groups come in. That weekly or bi-week, whenever, reinforcement of that connection and the safety and the willingness to hear whatever other men have to share and have me heard for what I have to share. I mean, just last week I was in my group and I did a piece of anger work, rage work, and everybody in the circle was like sitting back at the end like this, like, holy shit, Rick, where's that been? I said, it's been building for a while. And I knew it was safe to do it. I knew that they could handle it, contain it, and not be damaged by it. But I think the men's groups are a brilliant way of doing that. And I'm so happy to see that there are thousands of men's groups. Some of them are in kid groups, some of them are other men's organizations, some of them are startup out therapists like you. I don't care where you find it. Find a men's group, get in it, and start doing that work because it's so important.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard of Promise Keepers out there. It's a Christian-based men's group platform, right? And I think contact with other men is essential. And I do want to advocate for this bridge between thinking and feeling. One of the most powerful bridges between thinking and feeling is symbolization and ritualization. To do meaningful things together, not just based on our individual practices or our meaning making processes that have to do a lot with thinking and feeling and magician stuff, but stuff that we make up together. Meaningful activities. I do that with couples all the time, right? Help couples to develop meaningful, symbolic things to be done together that help them to bridge thinking and feeling. There's a yearning for that. My joke with this is that if there's any 12-step meeting that all humans could attend regularly, it would be Meaning Makers Anonymous.
I love it.
Where I could say, hey, I'm Brian, and gosh, I'm making a lot of meaning. I mean, that's the shadow side of it, because it can create so much fragmentation and splitting and throwing opinions and being right. But the beautiful side of that is like, hey, let's make some meaning together.
Or let's support each other in peeling away the meaning that we've made that no longer serves us. It keeps us isolated. It keeps us disconnected. It keeps us not caring for our bodies and so forth. Absolutely. I love that. Meaning Makers Anonymous. I'm going to remember that.
Yeah.
Whoops. What is it? Whoops spasm.
Well, a warp spasm.
Warp spasm. I never heard that.
Rick, he's gone into the warp spasm.
Well, last week, nobody knew the term, but boy, really.
Yeah. Another thing I'd just like to touch on before we start to orient to close here is one of the things that's really annoying to me about psychological discourse out there is narcissism conversations. it's just endlessly annoying to me, because the thing is that people out there banging on about narcissism end up being quite narcissistic. You know what I mean? And so one of the things that I love about doing work with symbols are a bridge between thinking and feeling. They're a bridge between earth and sky. To me, narcissism needs more of a symbolic image, because otherwise it's just the head. And people assessing and evaluating and diagnosing and essentially being narcissistically grandiose. So one of the things I love about the image of the royal archetype, where you have this image of sovereignty, the chieftain, the chieftainess in the psyche, is this archetypal image of a father holding up a child to the sky. I just love just a simple, profound image. I think it's really relatable image, where us men, us fathers, and whoever the man is can relate to this image of lifting a child up to the sky in a gesture of reverence and praise.
Right.
And as an image of elevation. And I think this is just inside the human psyche, to be elevated and to elevate. And if we just keep on collapsing that, oh, that's narcissistic, it's not satisfying. It's not satisfying. We want to be elevated. We want to elevate.
Yeah. How do we do that in a healthy way? Yeah. How do we do that? Like the men elevated you, and that was so moving for you, so powerful, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of work to do, my friend.
Yeah. I had another mentor once say, in any given situation, how can I ask myself, how do I make life right?
Yeah.
Which is a penetrating philosophical question. Like, how can I make life right in this moment?
I love that question.
It's just
beautiful, Brian.
Yeah. Well, toxic masculinity is another term that gets thrown around. It's another big discourse out there. Right. What do you think would be an alternative? What do you, if you could label it? Now, there's limitations to labeling. If you could generate an alternative term to toxic, the thing that you're nurturing in men, what would you call it?
Yeah, in my book, or in our book, because I have a co-author, Power Tools for Men.
Power Tools for Men.
Yeah, it's
get out that hydraulic, drill.
Yeah, and hundreds of tools in this book for men. We call it unhealthy masculinity, and the subtitle for our book is a blueprint for healthy masculinity. So we never even mention the term toxic masculinity, because it's such a loaded term that it immediately gets a reactivity from, many, many, many men, and rightfully so. So we talk about unhealthy ways of expressing masculinity, many of which you and I have unpacked during this last couple hours, and healthy ways of expressing masculinity. And there's some tools that can help with that. And being in a men's group, for example, is one of the primary things that myself and my co-author highly recommend. Leonard Shimchak, my co-author, started or was part of a men's group in Australia, of all places, the most masculine of masculine cultures, way back in the early 1980s, long before he joined MKT. And we said 60 men showed up at this meeting. And he said he had no freaking idea why he was there. What am I doing here with 60 men? What is this about? I'm scared, And he stuck with it. And it changed his life, of course, in very real ways. And he's been in men's groups nonstop since then, as have I. We call it healthy masculinity, and moving towards it. There's not a magic step. It's a practice of practicing a set of skills, a set of awarenesses. Sitting in circle is one of them, doing daily practice of some kind of connection with something greater than yourself. Call it meditation, prayer, whatever works for you. Getting connected with a mission, working on the archetypes, so that you have a more complete expression. That's what the archetypes are about, right? Having a complete expression we're not coming from just one energy or one place. We can access the lover, we can access the magician when it's appropriate. We can access the warrior when it's needed, and I can access the king when it's needed. That kind of thing. So that's what we espouse. We don't believe in toxic masculinity. We believe in men that have been misled through, thousands of years of culture that has made it not okay for us to be who we are naturally, our natural, loving, brilliant, connected selves. And we believe that when men find that, this hurtful, violent aggression goes away. It doesn't go away, it gets expressed differently. It's expressed differently. Instead of acting out and cutting and slashing and, doing things to women, children, the world, ourselves, we get the directive different. And it's magical to be with men like you, my friend, and like Henry, and like Leonard, and so many others that we're privileged to be part of, who have, if not embarked on that journey, we have discovered ways to do that. And wow, what a difference it makes in our lives, right? What a difference.
I'm thinking of this huge image of a power tool called a nuclear containment facility, where you have these nuclear forces of the emotions that are churning in the body, and to create a container that can step down that huge nuclear power and spin out available energy for connection and creative action and stuff like that. I think so many people are longing to have a bigger mission and feel kind of impotent, or they grab a mission that is well, I don't know, it's not healthy. It's not integrated with the whole of society or the whole of the family. And I think rageaholic men express this really interesting paradox that, curiously, with all that rage, they feel very impotent.
Absolutely. And particularly rageaholic white men. I mentioned all those mass shootings. Almost all of them, maybe one or two, were done by a person of color. The rest were white men acting out in ways that were so destructive. When all they really wanted to say was, I need help. Please help me. I'm isolated. I'm alone. I'm scared. I'm angry, whatever it is. Help me. And there's no place for them to go, or at least they believe there's no place for them.
So I talk a lot about, I think this will be our last riff.
Okay.
I talk a lot on the Boundless body. One of the core questions is, what can a body do?
Mm-hmm.
Which is an open-ended, penetrating, deep philosophical question. And I've been focusing a lot on play. A body can play. And a lot of men have lost their ability to engage in spontaneous rough and tumble play, and just play and have fun. And I'm thinking, when I think about healthy masculinity, I think about a man that can elevate and be elevated, has the capacity to surrender to other men elevating them, and be fierce and get other guys to surrender to being elevated. These are the people that have a allergy to compliments. I'm sure you've run into this one, right? Allergies to compliments. And I'm thinking playfulness. What are some other qualities of healthy masculinity? Playfulness, humor, flexibility.
Yeah,
What?
Willingness to be wrong. Just say, I made a mistake. Fuck. How many men
I don't
say
know.
that? They'd rather bite their tongue off than say, I made a mistake, or I'm wrong, or I don't know, is another great thing for men to be practicing. And regarding the allergy to compliments, when somebody gives you a compliment, say thank you and nothing more. Not thank you, but, or thank you and, just thank you. Otherwise, you're saying to the man who just gave you the compliment, you're a liar. You don't really see me. And that changed my life. I mean, I had that terrible allergy, like so many men did, maybe 25 years ago. And a therapist said, here's a practice for you, Rick. And I want you to do this every freaking day. Every time somebody gives you a compliment or says something positive about you. And the first couple of times it was that, thank you. It was so hard because I was so used to deflecting. Yeah, but you're the one, And as I practiced that, I noticed the impact on me and the impact on other men was profound. They felt seen and heard and felt like, oh, somebody actually accepted that compliment.
There's like a one-upmanship that's like the other side of this stuff where we can get lost in one-upmanship and being right. And I think you offered a great antidote to that. Tolerance for the unknown,
Right.
Tolerance for uncertainty, tolerance for conflict.
Yeah.
Tolerance for nurturance. How about that?
Huge. And playfulness was a big one for me. Because when I was 7, the oldest of 6 kids, my dad put me on his knee when he was leaving the family and said, you're the man of the house now. Take care of your mother and take care of your siblings. 7 years old. I lost all my play.
Man up, Rick. Come on, man up. You're 7.
And I did what assiduously as I could with my little 7-year-old heart going, okay, here's how I do this, I think, And of course, when I got married, I kept doing the same shit. And my wife's looking at me like, what's wrong with you? You don't need to do that for me. I thank you very much. Yeah. And I lost my playfulness. And I'm with a woman now who's an expressive art therapist, and in addition to being a sex coach, remarkable combination. Yeah. And she's just on me constantly, like, let's be playful tonight. Let's do something fun tonight. Let's do some art together. And at the beginning, it was like, no, that doesn't sound like fun to me at all. But it's become more fun, and I still kick and scream, but I'm learning to be more playful. And it's been a huge gift for me, reclaiming some of that childhood playfulness, excitement, exploration. Been huge.
72, still learning.
Yep. I don't intend to stop. I think as soon as I stop, I die. I mean, if not physically, then emotionally and spiritually. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
So grateful to be in the community that I'm in now, to be in a relationship that I'm in, to be able to speak with men like you and raise up our aliveness and raise up our continuously working to peel our own onions and maybe supporting someone else to peel theirs.
Yeah. Well, Rick, I really want to honor you for being an elder that's deeply contributed to my life, to my path as a helper, my path as a man, my path of waking up to places where I have shadow behaviors and so on. So, really want to honor you for that and for all the incredible work that you've done in the world to support men transforming.
Thank you so much, Brian. I appreciate you noticing that. And I want to honor you too for listening into this magnificent man, his career. When we first started talking 20 years ago, you couldn't imagine where you are today, but you had a thought that something's not working in my life. I need to move forward. And you did it, brother. You did it. Good on you. Good on this podcast. I love it. I love the title. Do you have
awesome, Rick?
Friend?
Thank you. All right. Take good care.
You too. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to The Boundless Body with the Somatic Doctor. Please leave a comment, subscribe, and like us on social media.
We're a swarm, we're a colony, we're a multiplicity.
Until next time, be well.